Please join me and welcome Professor Allan Timmermann.
Thanks very much, Gloria, and of course she should also mention that she's an alum of UC San Diego, as are many in this audience, and of course UCSD has been one of the birthplaces of a lot of topics in a lot of methods emerging in forecasting, including co-integration, Granger causality, volatility forecasting, robust estimation methods using forecasting, etc. So I kind of feel at home here. It's great to be here. And I also want to thank you not only for turning up after that splendid gala dinner that we had last night, and I think also Rob and George and not least Pam really put on a show there, so that was magnificent. I am not going to try to dance like those Aborigines. I'll spare you for that. But it was setting the bar really, really high. I know that we're going to have the NBER NSF time series meetings in San Diego in September 2018, and then we'll have the SOFI, the Society for Financial Econometrics meetings in 2020 in San Diego also. And so I'm just here sort of absorbing it all and learning from the masters. It's quite a show that you guys have put on, so thanks very much for that. And thanks for the invitation also to give this talk. When Rob told me that it would actually be the Clive Granger Memorial keynote address, I was not only honored but also very, very happy about it, because Clive was a colleague of mine for about 15 or so years, and he won the Nobel Prize. I shared it with Rob Engel in 2003, and that was also the year where my son was born, and so it's interesting. I was coming into the economics department that morning, and I asked this student, "Hey, did you hear the news? Did you hear the news?" He said, "What? Your wife gave birth?" "No, Clive and Rob won the Nobel Prize." Don't tell that to my wife, by the way, that story there. But so of course, Clive was a wonderful man and a really good proponent and supporter, particularly of youthful academia. So I really owe a lot to him for kickstarting my career also, because I started at Birkbeck College in London, and then going from there to UCSD was already a big leap, and then afterwards, making it at UCSD was not least thanks to the support of him and Hal White and Rob Engel. Here you can see that he is being awarded the Nobel Prize by, I guess, King Gustav of Sweden, and Clive used to have in his office also a sort of a photograph of him shown being knighted by the Queen. And so he would kneel in front of her, and she would have this sword right by his shoulder. So you've got to have the nerves of steel when someone is holding a sword right next to your throat, right? And in fact, that's the transition to the next slide. I don't get to quote Queen Elizabeth so often, but I thought since we're all subordinates of her, I guess technically still here in Australia, right? I thought it would be a good occasion there. And this is my other alma mater, LSE, right? And so apparently she was being given a briefing on the economic or global financial crisis at the LSE in 2008 in November, so right after Lehman's bust on September 15th. And she was, complaining, why did nobody notice it? I should say that she did not send the economists to the Tower of London. So, we're a little bit beyond that by now, but there's no guarantee that that might not happen in the future if we don't get better at these things. By the way, I'm not claiming we should have predicted the financial crisis, but this is more a statement about nowcasting, I guess, right? Rather than forecasting. But it is interesting that it is, to this day, viewed as a blemish, a spot that we didn't sort of handle the financial crisis better than we did. I remember going to the ECB also shortly afterwards, and they would ask, hey, what should we do? Our models are breaking down, should we start to experiment with nonlinear models? I say, no, don't do that, because they're even more sensitive to outliers than linear models. So just be careful. But it was clear that everybody knew that their models had broken down. So what do you do if your model has broken down and you don't, first of all, how do you test for it? And secondly, what do you do in that situation? What do you put in its place? So that's really what this talk is going to be concerned with, right? And so we know that model instability is a widespread phenomenon. stock and watch on JBS 1996 for the vast majority of more than 100 macroeconomic time series, evidence of structural instability, right? And you pick your favorite test for structural instability, whether it's against the random walk time varying parameter model, whether it's against discrete but rare structural breaks, it's all there, right? Your ARIMA models break down left, right, and center. Okay, when you're modeling a macroeconomic time series, at least sort of at the monthly or quarterly horizon. And there's a nice survey in the Handbook of Economic Forecasting there by Barbara Rossi also that captures that. And so so of course, Gloria here mentioned that I also do financial forecasting. So I like to view us as forecasters as, in some sense, equivalent to financial risk managers. So in some sense, at the end of every day, Jamie Dimon, who's the head of JP Morgan, he receives presumably a value at risk estimate of how risky his portfolio is on that day, right? So call me crazy, but I think we should do the same thing with economic forecasting. I think at the end of every day we should send a conditional performance assessment report to Janet Yellen that will say, look, this is the probability, this is the health check for the economic forecast, even if those forecasts are only generated at a much lower frequency. And so that's because variables come and go. So we know that we should track exclusion of variables that are no longer relevant. If you're using a T-bill rate to forecast stuff, then you know that because of the zero lower bound, that has lost its predictive power. If you didn't use bank leverage during the financial crisis, you probably would have missed the crisis. At least you wouldn't have predicted it right, because that was a huge factor, as we now know. And then, of course, there's also the issue that even if the model doesn't break down, it may be taken over by a competitor. And so forecasting performance may be predictably poor in some economic environments. Well, then you've got to tell that to your, you saw, I guess, Brian yesterday when he was talking about Walmart, he was referring to his boss. So we are academics, so we don't have bosses. Maybe we do, but no, you have to report it to the decision maker. I guess we call it in academia, right? Okay, so we can distinguish between two types of forecast performance. One is the relative performance of one model or one set of forecasts relative to another. So you can think of the IMF comparing its forecast to consensus economics. It's an exercise I did about 10 years ago for IMF for their World Economic Outlook forecasts. And so the idea is that at any point in time, you'd like to, if you have access to multiple forecasts, you'd like to choose the forecast that has the best conditionally expected performance, right? And sure, I have done a lot of work on forecast combinations. You say, well, isn't that very strange? And sure, you could also do things like, tilting the combination weights. You can use backing and so forth. So you'll see that I will not deal with that today, but that's definitely some techniques that you can use with this approach. And then, of course, there's just the absolute forecasting performance, where you are comparing the performance of your forecasting model against that of say, a prediction of 0, if it's a random walk benchmark, or against a constant mean, or the previous value, if it's the random walk benchmark that you have there. Okay. So what do we do here? Well, it's I apologize in advance, it's early morning, although most of you have probably had your coffees or teas by now. It's a rather technical paper there. By the way, it will be available within 2 weeks or so. I thought I would have had the time to work on and polish the paper on the plane, but although it's a 15-hour ride from LA, then it's it's also late at night, so I didn't do that. But we'll have it available on our website very soon. So it's basically we go in and derive bounds on the expected relative mean squared error performance of pairs of non-nested or nested models. We cover both cases. These are hold uniformly in finite samples, and they account for parameter estimation error. Okay. And so then we also, since we think of the forecaster as a risk manager, we also go in and sort of establish this concept of the gains from monitoring performance, right? And I'm not someone that comes out of operations, but probably many of you might be able to give suggestions about that literature, which I'm not really familiar with. Anyway, so the concept of monitoring instruments allow us to compute bounds on the expected gains from monitoring performance of one model versus another. It could be a big versus a small model, or two similarly sized models. We cover both cases. And then we also show that for there to be gains from monitoring and forecasting performance, it has to be the case that one model doesn't completely dominate and overwhelm the other, because otherwise you just go with the best model at any point in time, right? So, but even if you have one good model that actually includes a true predictor, there's no guarantee it'll beat the smaller model, because we know in forecasting that small is beautiful because of estimation error. So if the signal strength in the big model is not sufficiently strong, then of course it may be that the smaller model, at times, at least beats the big model. And we will cover exactly that case. You'll see it's very intuitive. Okay. So what is new about these monitoring instruments? Well, they track the conditionally expected performance of these pairs of forecasting models. Again, we keep it simple. You would have a much bigger than 2 number, so you can have more than 2 forecasting models that are competing. In principle, the math doesn't change. The monitoring performance can then, or the forecasting performance can improve as a result of you, at a given point in time, choosing the model with the best conditionally expected forecasting performance. Yeah? And then, as I think one of the bigger contributions to this paper is to characterize the properties that these monitoring instruments must have in terms of the strength of the instruments as well as the strength of the predictors, because it turns out that both of them matter. And they can't be too weak. If the predictor is very, very weak, then even if I give you extremely good monitoring instruments, it's not going to help you. So both of them matter. Okay, so we're covering both the non-nested and the nested case. I'll start with the non-nested case because the nested case is in some sense a special case of that. And so here you have, say, two competing forecasting models that are, using unique predictor variables in the simplest case. And what we show here is that none of the models can be too dominant for there to be gains from monitoring and forecasting performance. If that were the case, again, you just stick to one of them through thick and thin. And the nested case is particularly interesting because there the role of estimation error is particularly clear for this case. Because there, you have say, a 0 forecast from the small model, and then the big model has a single predictor variable in it. So you can see that's sort of like a big horse racing a small horse. And then we can show exactly, very precisely, econometrically, the conditions on the strength of the predictor variable for there to be gains from switching between the small and the big model. Okay, just as a motivating example, here are some data from the Green Book forecast. The Green Book forecasts are the ones generated by the US Federal Reserve, the quarterly forecast of the GDP deflator. And then we compare them to the Survey of Professional Forecast, which is sort of like the private sector, banks, industry, academics, where we take the median of those forecasts. And then what we plot is the loss differential. Because remember, we are comparing model performance, so we're looking at not losses, but loss differentials. Delta as in differential, L as in loss. Green Book minus SPF, that's the squared forecast error at any quarter for the Green Book minus that of the SPF. So if this is positive, that actually means the Green Book forecasts were worse, right? They're worse in the sense that they generated a larger squared forecast error. If it's negative, it means the Green Book forecast errors were smallest in absolute value, and so they are in some sense better than the SPF. And what you can see that in the beginning of the sample, in fact, so the blue is tracking that loss differential. You can see that for long periods of time, in fact, the Green Book were really beating very strongly the SPF, the private sector forecast. But then, sort of around the time of the in the 2000s, before the financial crisis and thereafter, in fact, there was a prolonged period, a couple of periods where it's the other way around, where now the SPF forecast, when this becomes positive, that means that the SPF forecasts are smaller in magnitude than those of the Green Book forecast, right? And then we also generate, as you will see, we'll have this monitoring regression that allows us to predict the mean squared error loss differential, and that's tracked by the red line. We are using the macroeconomic uncertainty measure published by Jurado and Ludvigsen and Ingrid in a recent American Economic Review paper. And so this is our forecast. So at first we can see that here, these are out of sample one step ahead forecast. We are predicting, I guess correctly, that for most periods, that the Green Book forecasts are best. But then we flip it here. So here we say, no, now we're going to go with the SPF forecast, and now we flip to the Green Book forecast, back to the SPF forecast. So this sort of just illustrates the concept, and what we're plotting in here as a result of using this simple switching rule, where if it's negative the red line, then you go with the Green Book forecast, otherwise you go with the SPF forecast. And you'll see here, this is the cumulative sum of squared error differences, which is one of my favorite diagnostic plots. You must have that in an empirical paper instead of subsample results, trust me. So here you'll see the difference between the green book and the SPF, and when it's negative, that means that, again, you can see that the SPF squared forecast errors are bigger, and so the green book forecasts are not so good just in 1980, but afterwards they're really much better than this SPF forecast, and this follows a period where they are about roughly equally good or bad, and then the SPF forecast get better. Okay, and then in the end you will see that we are landing on a negative value, which means then that the green book forecast in the aggregate across the entire sample actually perform a little bit better. So the red line measures how we perform the switching rule against the SPF forecast, and you'll see we do much better. And then the green line is capturing how we do against the green book forecast, and you'll see again we end up on a positive value, which means that the squared error, sum of squared errors from the green book or the SPF are higher than those from the switching rule. So this is just sort of like a small illustration of this concept of sort of monitoring. And you'll see that there were actually many papers yesterday that were talking about how sort of, how do we capture a breakdown in forecasting performance using sort of Kalman filtering or state space equations, etc. Right? You can think of so that made me wonder, how's this research related to all these cool papers we saw yesterday? Well, think of this. Here we're introducing a monitoring instrument, a conditioning piece of information, which is sort of extraneous to the model, right? So something on the side, and you'll see that in this case here is this uncertainty measure. This macroeconomic uncertainty measure, which says that maybe if macroeconomic uncertainty is extremely high, then the SPF guys start performing better than the green book forecasters. Yeah? So that's what conceptually we do. Okay, so over to the formal development in the paper. So we have two models, model 1 and 2. Each of them are generating forecasts based on estimated coefficients there, parameters. Beta hat 1t, beta hat 2t, and then we get the forecast errors. So that's the actual minus the forecast, which is the function of these recursively estimated parameters. And on the squared error loss, which is what we'll cover here, then the loss differential takes this form, right? And then you can test the null of equal unconditional expected average forecasting performance this way here. And you can do that using the Mariano test. Just like here, you regress the loss differential, the time series of loss differentials on an intercept, and then you do a t-test on that. Yeah? Okay, now Giacomini and White in a super nice, very important agricultural paper in 2006 generalized that approach to say, look, why don't we conduct a conditional test? That's something we will be building on, where you have some instruments, ZT, that lie in this conditioning information set, and then you can regress. It's a very straightforward conceptual extension of Mariano. You just regress delta L t plus 1, now not only on the constant, which takes its theta naught coefficient, but also this instrument Z1t. Yeah? And so now the null of equal conditional forecasting performance at each point in time then implies that theta naught and theta 1 is equal to 0. By the way, we will be assuming here that theta 1 is just a scalar. So it's just a single instrument of monitoring, but you could have as many as you want also. All right, now, so suppose that we find in fact that there are some instruments that can predict the forecasting performance of your favorite model against a random walk or constant sort of a just you could forecast just the mean of the time series. That's something that's used quite a bit in forecasting of stock returns, called the prevailing mean model. So suppose that you find actually that there's evidence that you can track that there's time variation in this relative forecasting performance. Well, that means that you have these instruments ZT that can be used to forecast the conditionally expected loss differential. Yeah? And following again Giacomini and White, we can then use conditional switching rule. We select model 1 if its conditionally expected loss is less than that of model 2. Remember the loss differential took this form, so it's the squared error of model 1 relative to model 2. So if that's negative, that means you should go with model 1, right? Okay, and otherwise you go with model 2. So that's our switching rule, and this is the conditional switching indicator. Okay. And then the expected loss of the switching rule relative to both model 1 and model 2 measures then what we call the expected gain from monitoring. It's sort of like, think about portfolio manager, right? So, you know, how much do you improve the Sharpe ratio or the invariance utility from, in some sense, monitoring variation in the first and second moments? Okay, all right. So, what is then the scheme by which these forecasts are being generated by models 1 and 2? Well, when you develop theory, you must keep things simple, so let's do that. So here's the data generating process. Two predictors, model 1 just uses the first one, model 2 uses the second one, and in both cases we generate forecasts using an estimation window of n observations, yeah? Alright, and then this is the least squares forecast. Alright, and then if you plug that in, accounting for estimation error, then you get that the loss differential, delta LT plus 1, takes this form here. So you can see, even though I keep things as simple as I possibly can, you still get a bunch of terms, right? So all the more reason to not go crazy here. Right, and this delta term, that's the estimation error for model 1 and 2, yeah? All right, and so you'll see that you know, what matters is some cross product between these, well, possibly unpredictable component, at least it's not correlated directly with x1 or x2, times these terms, and then there's a bunch of terms that reflect the estimation error and also the linear effect of the predictors. Okay, now characterizing the expectation of this delta L, because of these terms here, beta hat j, right? Beta hat j has these terms in the denominator, which means that they may not even exist for finite TNN, right? And so it's technically different, even though this is an incredibly simple setup, right? It's actually technically challenging. And you can't just go ahead and use the classical central limit theorem, because that, well, would typically require n to go to infinity, which you may not be interested in because you don't have a finite and infinite sample size, right? Even though you can still get some intuition out of the standard asymptotics, because, you know, as you know, the estimation error is OP n to the minus half, and so if you just stuff all the estimation error related terms into one component here, you'll see that what is left is this, right? So essentially you can see that in some sense, if you want to see, will this fluctuate over time in a way that fits sign, then you can see that in some sense it has to be the case that none of these square terms which you can sign will be too dominant, because if beta 2 squared x2t is always much bigger than this guy, then of course, you know, these terms will, without zero in expectation, will not matter. You will always say, oh, model 2 is generating the best forecast. So it has to be the case that somehow these terms here balance in the right sort of way for there to be switches in the which model is expected to give the best forecasting performance. And that's exactly what we address. So we account for estimation error and we give results that hold finite samples, and others that don't require n to go to infinity. All right, so this is the wake-up slide of the morning. I'm going to give you the intuition, just to give you a sense of what this involves. It's a little bit hairy. So basically, and there's something like 7 or 8 theorems in the paper, so we're just going to look at 4, I think, which are the more intuitive ones. So basically we need a bunch of moment conditions and mixing conditions, but the key thing is really this guy here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, look, the magnitude of the effect of the coefficient of a predictor 1 or 2 can be written in this way. So we are parameterizing it this way. And think of this as just being 1. That's what we do in the Monte Carlos, 1 or 2 or 3, something like that. And then you can see that since n is increasing, you know, with the sample size, just come from down here, you know, the smaller is this alpha xj, the stronger is the signal in that predictor error. And I'm going to make 2 key assumptions here, namely that the second model, in this case here, has a stronger predictor than the first model, and also, moreover, that the second predictor, it's the strength of that predictor is, as measured by alpha x2, is less than 1/2. So let's just look at these assumptions. Now we skip the sort of formal veil there. But again, just weak moment conditions in x and epsilon, no need for exponential type inequalities, Bernstein type inequalities, anything like that, right? Which we had in a previous version. This is much cleaner, I think. Okay. And again, we can alpha specificity, certain types of non-stationarity, etc. But the key thing is really this one. And for many of you, this will probably be a new way of thinking about the strength of a predictor. But again, the smaller the value of alpha HDA, the stronger the predictor. And in particular, in the recent paper in Econometrica, the March issue, Hirano and Wright, they considered the local to zero case. Basically, this is a trick for doing asymptotic analysis such that even as the sample size goes to infinity, estimation error does not vanish in this case here, right? And so you can see that's a natural cutoff point, because we assume that, in fact, and that, by the way, is called that's the local to zero case, and so the predictor has to be stronger than local to zero. If that's not the case, you can't actually establish these results. If the forecasting variables are too weak, you can't establish results. And then again, we just arbitrarily say, oh, model 2 is the one that we'll assume is the better, has the better predictor. Here that we have that, then we can get the following result. And again, this is the data generating process. We can split the loss differential process into a well-behaved part, which we call delta L t plus 1 star, and then a residual term. And now we can show that, in fact, the loss differential, remember, this may not have, the moments of this loss differential may not exist, right? At least may not exist. But we can extract a well-behaved component such that the two are identical to each other, but with a very high probability. So when this term here is negative, then as in large samples, in fact, this is the term that is almost identical to what we're really interested in. And then we can establish bounds on that the well-behaved part of the loss differential. And then we can say that, hey, the model with a stronger predictor, so that was model 2, as you recall, is expected to dominate in a mean square error loss sense. Model 1, and this is the order by which it dominates, right? These are just coefficients, that's scaling coefficients that depend on the parameters of the GDP, but this is really the key term here. And so basically what we show, just to put it in words, is that, again, you can't, this is the simplest possible example you can imagine with forecasting analysis. It does not get any simpler than this. Two predictors, right? Two competing models, that's it. Sorry. It gets even simpler if I look at the nested case, which we'll do next. But it doesn't get much simpler by and large when you have two different predictors, right? And so here we provide finite sample properties for the performance of this, the well-behaved part of the loss differential, which we can do, and we can then show that they are identical to each other with a very high probability in large samples, at least even finite samples, provided that this term here is close to 1. And so then we can go in and say, look, we can characterize the amount by which model 2 is expected to dominate model 1. If the predictor of model 2 is first stronger than local to 0, so we have to make that assumption, and more powerful than the predictor of model 1. And then we can also show that, in fact, if you go and run a debug Mariano test, because I saw a lot of very impressive forecasting results yesterday with, we have a structural break test and our sort of performance is better than our competitors. But please don't forget to put standard errors on those results, right? It's very important to conduct inference. And so, for example, I can show what we can show here, and this paper, by the way, I forgot to say that Yin-Shu Tzu is a superstar. He's fantastic. So he's my student. He's going to the ICO, or the operations department at the University of Oregon now. So he's starting off there, sort of a big data guy. So this paper here is not least due to his skillful efforts. And so what we can show is that the strength of the predictor of the best forecasting model, the one that uses the strongest predictor, has to be less than 1/4 here. Otherwise, you can run as many debug Mariano tests as you want in the world, you won't have any power. This is also nice, right? So now I can tell you exactly, should you run a debug Mariano test, when will you have power or not? That's the result. Okay, now, this is just comparing model 2 to model 1. What about if we wanted to see what my Fitbit says? I'm not checking for the number of steps. It's about 20 minutes. 20 minutes, yeah. Okay, good. Right, so of course, it's all very well that so what we've shown you now is just under what conditions can we actually discriminate between two forecasting models. One has a strong predictor, the other one has a weak predictor. And now we've formalized that, right? Which I think is a new result. But now, suppose that you want to say, well, what are the gains from monitoring? Well, if you think about maybe it's a semantic point, but for there to be gains from monitoring and not just go with one model all the time, it has to be the case that sometimes they flip. Sometimes one model is best, in other economic environments, the other model is best. So how do we capture that? Well, we're going to have this switching rule and the associated monitoring regression. So the loss differential now, we're going to regress that on a bunch of monitoring instruments, ZT, right? At the simplest, this is an intercept and a time varying predictor. And we do that using a rolling estimation window of length n. Okay, so this is the least squares estimate. And then again, the rule is going to be that if we predict that the loss differential is negative, so that means square error of model 1 minus square error of model 2 is negative, then we go with model 1, otherwise we go with model 2. So this is the setup here, just to give you a timeline. So we split the sample size big T into this is the estimation. I mean, this is how we think about it conceptually. You have the estimation window where you estimate the parameters of the model as n observations. Then you have the monitoring window, which has m observations. And then the remaining observations P are used for forecast evaluation, right? So this is the setup how you split big T. Yeah? And then m and P are functions of T, which we are going to suppress in most of our notation. So. Oh, yes, another one of those. Yeah, don't worry, I'll get back to it. But again, I think that it is important that we have formal results, because if you don't have formal results, econometricians are not going to listen to us, right? They demand formal results, otherwise they say, well, yeah, but is it really rigorous what you're doing there for the assessment of the forecasting performance? Can a switching rule ever work? So this is so what we show here is the conditions under which a switching rule can work. The conditions under which you might want to switch between IMS forecasts, survey professional forecasts, consensus economics, and the Fed forecast, maybe of the GDP deflator or some variable that they are all trying to predict. So again, a bunch of moment and mixing conditions, but here again, this is where really the meat goes. This is the new stuff. All right, so let's see what it says. Well, the monitoring instrument needs to be correlated, first of all, with this cross product of that part of the error, that part of the innovation to the dependent variable, epsilon t1, that was not captured by the individual axis, right? And we, again, parameterize it this way, so it's a function of that's in order to do the asymptotic analysis, it's a function of the length of the monitoring window, right? And then this, again, is alpha zj, which is parallel to what it was for the alpha xt, right? And now we have this condition here which says that the monitoring instrument cannot be too weak for the second model. So basically, it has to be the case that it's bounded this way here. So if alpha x2, remember, it had to be less than a half, r had to be greater than 8, that's the number of moments that you assume exist on the underlying data. And so that if r is 8, then it's 6 over 16, right? So it's, this is less than a quarter. So you can see that the monitoring instruments have to be pretty strong for you to be able to tell when is the Fed forecast not so good, when are the survey professional forecasters, right? So, there's a lot of demand, there's a big requirement on the strength of the monitoring instruments. And these are new results. I don't think you will find them in operations research or any other literature that has dealt with monitoring, because we have sort of different concepts of asymptotic analysis in different fields. Moreover, the combined strength of the predictors for Model 2 and the monitoring instruments for Model 2 have to be such that they're stronger than that of Model 1. Right? But again, it's just a way of saying, hey, the predictors are strong for Model 2 and so are the monitoring instruments. So it's very intuitive. Once you do that, then you can show again the kind of results that we had before, which basically says that with a high probability, that's what this means here, the expected performance of the switching rule relative to Model 1, that's this guy here, is greater than or equal to, so this is the gain from using the switching rule relative to Model 1. It's of this order here, so you can see this is really key. So again, remember, you want this to be as small as possible. If this is small, that means you are beating the pants off Model 1. Similar result relative of the switching rule relative to Model 2. Because remember, you want to beat both Model 1 and Model 2, right? Otherwise, there's no point in switching. You just go with Model 1 all the time, and you go with Model 2 all the time. Here you're switching, right? So switching ain't easy, right? You have to have some conditioning information that tells you, hey, when do the Fed forecasts break down, or when are the private sector forecasters particularly good? And you can see it's the same sort of order of magnitude that you go in here. By the way, I won't have time to cover it today. We have a bunch of Monte Carlo simulations that actually show that this stuff really works. Again, it beats equal weighted forecast combination, it beats pre-tests, it beats a whole range of things. Alright, so what are the interpretation of it? Well, the expected gain from monitoring is of this, and then not using either model 1 or model 2 as your forecast all the time. This is this order here. The more accurate the predictive variable of model 2, and the better the monitoring instruments, the bigger the expected gain from monitoring. Moreover, and this is actually key, you know, you say, well, what kind of game is it that he's playing with us? You know, it's early mornings, and he's just, you know, because he should be taking this Z, this monitoring instrument, and he should, you know, stuff it into the forecasting model, and then it would be much better, right? Probably down upon you. Yeah, I bet you're all sitting there, and, you know. But it turns out that that's what we call the big guess model. That's when you have a model that has x1 plus Z, or maybe x1 plus x2 and Z. It doesn't work, because you can actually show easily that, you know, there's some many situations in which, you know, even though, I mean, sticking the monitoring instrument ZT into the forecasting model is not going to work, because it's going to be orthogonal to the forecast area epsilon t equals 1, even though it's not orthogonal to the cross product of those three of xj epsilon t equals 1 and zt. So in other words, if you were to add the monitoring instrument just as another predictor, it's not going to work, but it will work in this switching, in this monitoring. You can show that both mathematical, and we have some examples of it, and you can also show that through simulations and empirically. If I have the time, I'll show it to you empirically as well. So the monitoring instrument need not have any predictive power if added to the forecasting model on its own. So it's almost like, you know, here you have a new concept of some things, right? So they're not, I mean, monitoring instruments are not like predictors. We're using them very differently, right? We're using them for this monitoring or this switching rule here. But so you can't just stick them in there, because they're oftentimes not going to work. And by the way, if you do that, then you also have to estimate an additional predictor, an additional coefficient, and that could pull you down in terms of estimation error. Okay, now this analysis actually then tells us if you want to, so what are good candidates for monitoring instruments? Well, one monitoring instrument which you always have available is the squared forecast of model 2 minus the squared forecast of model 1. You can show that that actually is expected to be correlated with the loss differential, at least if you ignore estimation error. Similarly, just the lagged forecast errors themselves, forecast error differentials, delta LT, right? Those are, I mean, you always have them. And by the way, one thing I should also mention here, I forgot to do it, is that oftentimes you can't just throw ZT into the forecasting model, because if the forecasting comes from the Federal Reserve, you did not generate those forecasts, so you can't just add ZT to them, right? So it's not that simple. It's another reason for you not to use them as additional predictors. Okay, so then, how are we doing on time? Another 9 minutes or so? Okay. Then the nested case, I did mention that that's particularly simple. So again, as you can see, things are already in pairs, so let's keep things as simple as we can. So here we have now the model 1 is a small model that predicts 0, literally. Yeah. So this is the forecast error differential is E1 t plus 1 squared minus E2 t plus 1 squared, and then the big model just uses a single, just one predictor, right? And this is the estimated coefficient, and then you can write this way. Now again, you can see that if beta is very large, so if the coefficient here is large and this variable here is important, you're always just going to go with the quote-unquote the big model, right? On the other hand, if beta is very small, then it'll be dominated by the estimation error, and then you always go with a small model. So it has to be the case that there's something that trades off these two effects, and that has to come from this cross product here, right? And that's, namely, if you have some instrument ZT that can pick up time variation in this component here, then that can, so to speak, cause the sign of this term here to flip with Z. Okay, and so that's basically what we are summarizing here. So we need some variable ZT that can predict when this coefficient of this term here, beta xt epsilon t equals 1, is less than 0, because otherwise, this positive term here is always going to dominate. And so again, it has to be the case that beta is close to 0, so that it doesn't dominate. The squared term here doesn't dominate, so this term is always positive. And you always go with a big model. And So we go in and formalize that using the same sort of techniques that we did before. This is the same sort of thing. Okay, and we show it again. And here's actually interesting. So remember that we parameterize the coefficient, that this is the signal strength of our predictor, yeah? And the smaller is alpha x, the better it is, the stronger is the predictor, the bigger is alpha x, the weaker it is. And so it turns out that in this case with a single predictor, if alpha x is less than a half, what we show here, then the big model is best on average. If alpha x is higher than half, then the big model is worse. You have a negative sign here. Then you always go with a zero forecast. Yeah. So in other words, now we've shown with a single predictor that if the signal strength is pretty high, alpha x is less than half, then you always the performance of the big model is expected to be highest, to be best. Whereas if the big model is weak, then estimation error dominates, and you just go with the small model. And this is, so now we've sort of like formalized that. Yeah? Okay, now what about switching? I mean, surely in this case, can I really get switching out of this? You know, one model always predicts 0, the other model predicts whatever beta hat xt. Why would I get switching? Well, it's because, suppose again that the signal in the big model, the one that uses xt as its predictor, suppose it's not too strong, so it doesn't totally dominate, and it's not too weak either. This is the Goldilocks scenario, right? So the porridge, it can't be too hot, it can't be too cold, it has to be in the middle. And that's basically what we go in and show. Okay, so again on the weak restrictions on the distribution of the instruments, but if we have these instruments that are correlated with this term here, that's the mathematical requirement here, formalize it. And then here is the strength of those monitoring instruments. Well, then we can show, basically go in and show just like we did before, that we beat, we beat the small model and we beat the big model, and this is the amount by which we expect to, this is the bounds on how much we expect to beat them by. Okay, so the remaining 4 or 5 models, now that we've gone through this asymptotics, and normally I wouldn't cover asymptotics before 9:30 a.m. I think there's a rule against that, isn't there? But again, I really do believe these are super useful results. I mean, it's not just so for the sake of elegance. I mean, now we actually know, we've established conditions under which, monitoring or switching between forecasting models actually is valid. And we can show exactly what are the determinants, the strength of the monitoring instruments, the strength of the predictors, they both matter, right? And we can establish bounds on it. So we actually now have a formal theory for when we should expect to have gains from these monitoring forecasting performance. All right, so let's go back to our Green Book and SPF forecasters. This is sample period. We have a 10-year monitoring window, and these are our monitoring instruments. And by the way, I do strongly encourage, of course, that you go and if you're interested in using this approach, sort of like a treasure hunt, go and look for monitoring instruments, right? They have to, what the mathematical properties are of those, right? So it's stuff like, this is the properties that they should, so that it should be correlated with these terms here. Anyway, when we do that, here's just some monitoring instruments. So these are Diebold-Mariano tests, so they are normal distributed, right? And these are the instruments, sigma 1. This is the unemployment gap. This is sort of like a real-time version of the NBR recession indicator that Stock and Watson came up with. This is the macroeconomic uncertainty measure, and this is the average of the loss differential over the most recent 4 quarters. And what you'll see when it's negative, again, that means that the first one generates a lower mean square error compared to the second forecast. So you'll see Green Book significantly beats SPF on average over the sample. Then you can ask, do we beat Green Book? In which case we should have positive values here. These are t-statistics. Do we beat SPF? And you can see those are pretty solid numbers there, right? So if you do one-sided Diebold-Mariano, then you get significance both against the Green Book and against the SPF forecasts. And here's something that maybe if you want to remember one plot from this talk here, this is perhaps the one you should think of. So we thought we wanted to go crazy, right? So we said, look, I want to report every day Janet Yellen on her desk before she goes home, she gets a measure of what do we think is the expected performance of the Green Book forecast relative to the SPF forecast. And so we took daily data of this is the, I think the default or the term spread. We experimented with both. They both work, but every day, so we estimate the coefficients of the monitoring rule, and then we just update our estimates. It's like a simple filtering. Our estimate of what is the relative performance of the Green Book relative to the SPF forecast, and you'll see that the 0 is here. So for example, during the financial crisis, you'll see that here on it, so these are daily, updated daily. There were lots of days where we expected that the Green Book forecast would be worse than the SPF forecast, although most of the time, in fact, we expected them to be better, right? And so you'll see that, in fact, there's quite a bit of switching, and you can actually, on a daily basis, you can actually go and update what is the conditionally expected loss differential of the SPF versus the Green Book forecast. Then, on a final note here, we also stock return predictability. Of course, a lot of people are interested in that. So the prevailing mean, that's the one that's so hard to beat. This is simple, constant expected, constant risk premium model. We compare that to, say, forecast from a T-bill rate model. It's a bunch of combinations as well. This is what we get. So, this is the forecast. The small model just predicts, it estimates, the mean of stock returns. The big model has the mean plus the T-bill rate, where you have predictability from that. And you'll see that that's tracked the relative performance, small minus big, is the blue line. So you'll see that the T-bill rate was good at forecasting stock returns during the 70s, the stagflation, high inflation period. Then it hasn't been so good since, and it performed very poorly here after 2008. Now they say, well, now I'm going to have an instrument, ZT, which is just this unemployment gap. It's like the real-time version of the NBR recession indicator. So that's, suppose I just throw it in, I use it as an additional predictor. Then I get this line here, smallest minus biggest. Remember what I said before, you can't just take the monitoring instruments and tuck them into the forecasting model and use them as predictors. If you do that, defeat, right? This is the worst of all the models, ends up in the lowest point. However, if instead you use this unemployment gap to tell you when should you use the small model or when should you use the big model, you end up here or here. So this is measured relative to the small model, and this is measured relative to the big model that uses the T-bill rate to predict with all the time. So you can see that, again, you have a piece of information. It's very good for telling you, monitoring the relative performance of these two forecasting models that are trying to predict this highly noisy stock return, right? So it can be used for monitoring purposes, for this switching rule, for the sake of the switching rule, but you can't use it as a predictor, direct predictor. Okay, there's just a bunch of formal tests also. Okay, so just to conclude, what do we do here? Well, we come in and provide formal results on the expected performance of competing forecasting models. They can be nested, they can be non-nested. And then we sort of really push this concept of monitoring forecasting performance, I think, quite a bit. And we characterize conditions under which monitoring instruments provide value in a forecasting context. And I think it's very important they have different properties than simple predictors. There's a new class of conditioning information, so to speak, right? You have to be in the Goldilocks scenario where there's not one model that is too dominant, because otherwise you just, of course, stick with that through thick and thin. But it has to be the case that there's some scope for switching here, right? And both the strength of the monitoring instruments and of the underlying predictors, that's the alpha x's and the alpha z's, matter, also mathematically, for whether you can expect in any given situation to have gains from forecasting, from monitoring forecasting performance. Because please note, I'm not saying that you can always expect to perform better by monitoring forecasting performance and switching between these different models, right? In fact, we provide sufficient conditions for you for there to be gains, but oftentimes you will have very poor monitoring instruments that don't have much power, so the alpha z is big. Then it doesn't work, nor does the debug Mariano test. It won't have power, right? And again, so I think, I hope to unleash a little bit of a treasure hunt where we actually go out and see if we can find these instruments, these monitoring instruments, and then use them to, because we all know that, all models are wrong, some are useful, and we all know where that quote comes from, right? Of course. So, and so all models are misspecified, and so the small probes we send out in outer space, and so we want to I think that this idea of switching between misspecified models is a sound one. Thanks very much.